have some order around the table, please? And we move to item number 11, the 2019 elections, and whether we stick with the first past the post or move to single transferable vote. I'll move the recommendation for the sake of procedure. Councillor Cooper, second. Can I welcome to the table Warwick and our electoral officer. Very good to have our electoral officer here, Dale Ofsovsky. So if you'd like to outline briefly where you've got to and why the recommendation is as it is, and then we'll ask questions.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this opportunity occurs every 3 years prior to the following election. You have the opportunity to change the electoral system, which is currently first past the post. You have the opportunity to change it to STV, which is the single transferable vote system. In the paper, we've outlined some of the key advantages and disadvantages of each system, and we've tried to explain a bit about how some of the key features of STV, assuming you know how STV works and how a voter votes through STV by indicating their preferences. So the key features of how STV works is that firstly it's a proportional representation system, and the two key aspects that we've tried to explain in the report are the aspect of the quota, which sets a calculated total number of votes that a candidate needs to meet in order to get elected, which is different to FPP, where you basically have to beat your competitors. And the other aspect is the concept of wasted vote. You can vote for the person that you want to have a go, and you'll know that if the person's not successful, then your vote will be transferred to your second preference. Your Worship, I think those are the key aspects. We've recommended staying with the status quo purely because the feedback that we get around the traps, so to speak, is that there isn't an appetite to change and that people do find STV pretty complicated.
Thank you very much, Warwick. Dale, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillors will have noted that the electors themselves have the right to petition if they want a change of system. It requires 5% of the vote, which is 51,000, I think, and it also costs us something like 1.2 million for a referendum. But that is the legitimate right of electors if they disagreed with any council decision, if it were to be for the status quo. We now have questions. Do any councillors have questions? Councillor Darby, I see first of all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm looking at the part of the report that reflects local board views and implications, and I'm aware that there's been no formal report to boards on this matter. We've had a long lead-in time, and considering that local boards are as affected, if not more, because of the number, how is it that we've arrived at not treating with them in a formal way to get their formal feedback to contribute to a decision of the council of which they are part?
Thank you, Councillor. The answer to that is that we attempted in rather less formal means to get some indication or some feedback, and that happened in two ways. You recall that there was a report that we put to you to do with a submission to the Select Committee. That report included looking forward to other events and decisions that needed to be made by the Council, including STV and Māori Ward. And that same report went to all boards, and some boards commented on it and others didn't. And as part of the governance framework review exercise, we also included on the slides that we showed to board workshops that these issues were coming up as well. There wasn't a lot of discussion on those particular items, but we didn't really pick up an appetite for looking into that further.
Okay, well, I'll comment on that later, Mr. Mayor. The other point that I'm picking up from the report is in your recommendation in B, you refer to perceived complexity of the STV system. Can you explain the perception of complexity, not actual complexity, but the perception of complexity as being reason to dismiss a voting system? And did the jurisdictions of Dunedin, Greater Wellington, Kaipara, Kapiti, Marlborough, Palmerston North, Porirua and Wellington, so that's Greater Wellington and Wellington, did they also get lower turnouts when STV was introduced, the same or greater? Did they encounter perceived or actual complexity when they introduced it?
Your Worship, the reference to perceived complexity is just the typical sort of feedback comment that we get. It's anecdotal. STV is too hard to understand. I have found myself that if you apply some time, work out the maths, it's actually got a lot going for it. I'm a proponent for it myself. And what we're trying to reflect and hear is the feeling that we get around the council.
So there's no evidence of actual complexity that we picked up from the jurisdictions that I've just outlined?
No scientific evidence, it's anecdotal, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Clow.
Yes, I'm going to vote against B because I'm a supporter of STV. There's been a lot of criticism over the years about Australians, and indeed we have a famous Prime Minister who made a very funny quote about our migration loss when he talked about how it improved the intelligence of both countries.
It's the only time I ever agreed with him.
So I have to ask, the Australians have no problem with STV, and they've had it for a long time, and obviously I'm tongue-in-cheek in saying they seem to work it through, then surely we could work it through. So you got any comments, either Dale or Warren, about Australia and how they deal with it on a much larger scale and successfully?
Your Worship, we haven't studied Australia. Perhaps I could ask Dale, as the electoral officer, just perhaps to give some of his experience with councils that have tried with STV and perhaps gone back to FPP.
Well, Australia, of course, have used form of proportional representation for over 100 years, so they're well used to that. With regard to New Zealand, some of those councils, the 8 that used it in 2016, have used STV for quite some time, since about 2004, so they're well versed in that. Some of them, like Wellington City Council, moved to STV as a result of a poll, which was narrowly, I think it was 51 to 49 or something like that. They held a poll again in 2008, and it was reinforced, but a very slim majority. So those councils are using it successfully. Greater Wellington Regional Council moved to STV in 2013, largely because most, all but one of the constituent territorial authorities used STV, and they wanted consistency for the electors of the STV, because the DHBs, of course, have to use it. There are 3 councils that originally used STV and have moved back to FPP. Thames Coromandel District Council, Matamata District Council and the small Chatham Islands Council. The reasons that particularly Thames Coromandel gave was it didn't achieve the diversity that they expected, and also they've perceived that it was difficult for the electors to understand. So they're the 2 reasons that that council in particular gave for the reason for moving back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about the STV, and probably for Dale, because he takes the returns, if that's okay. One is, we've said here that STV, you usually get the result about a day later. I mean, I haven't seen that, but in your experience, is it usually a day, or does it seem to be quite a few days before you get those results? Because I often watch the WDHB to see what's happening, and a friend of mine's on there, and I often ring him, do you know yet? And he goes, no, still don't know, still don't know. So I just want to know how accurate that comment is.
With STV, we do not issue a progress result, because we believe it's too dangerous insofar as every vote makes a difference, or every vote counts. So when you input all the votes into the STV calculator, we ensure that all valid votes are in there, other than special votes that have to go off to the Electoral Commission. So once all votes are in, then we push the button, if you like, to prepare the preliminary results. We experienced, of course, in 2016 a huge rush on the election day morning, and of course we had a significantly larger hand-delivered votes on election day morning, which we then had to process, and we worked well into the night to achieve that. But generally, we now say to STV councils or the DHBs, don't expect a result on the or first of all, there is no progress result, so there's nothing available between 1 and 2 on the Saturday for STV. Expect it on Sunday morning. That's when we've worked all through the night to actually open and process and capture all those preferences for STV votes, and then run our audit reports and produce a result.
So it's still, you say, a day rather than on the night?
Correct. You won't get a...
That's preliminary, though.
That's a preliminary result. Now, some councils issue progress results for STV. We believe that's too dangerous in our view.
Okay, and the other question, if you'll indulge me, Mr. Chairman, is, I mean, I struggle with the DHB one, and because especially when you've got, you know, maybe 30 or 40 candidates, and we do have a really low vote turnout in local body elections. So the reason I ask this question is because I'm concerned about making it even harder for people. So do you, in terms of spoiled returns for STV, what's the percentage against maybe FPP, or do you measure that?
For the DHB elections in Auckland, it's been reasonably high, and other DHBs around the country. But that's particularly where the council uses FPP, and then voters then have to switch to STV. We would have between 10 and 15 of votes returned are deemed either informal or blank. So a lot of voters actually choose not to vote.
Don't even try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And others will actually make mistakes or tick.
And do you have a comparison between the FPP with the FPP?
Much, much lower. I haven't got the figure off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
I think Councillor Cooper may have just asked my question. It was really that we've obviously got first past the post for local government, and then I keep on getting the STV, I keep on calling it something else.
STDs.
Sounds like a disease. For the hospital board and stuff. And my question was, the difference in return, you know, do people stop once it got too hard? And I mean, I'm with everyone. I think that it's hard enough to get people to vote. I want to make this voting as simple as possible, and I'm just trying to get the evidence to show that maybe the alternative voting, STV, is harder for people to deliver, so therefore they don't bother.
That's correct. We'd have a high number of people that just submit it blank.
That answers my question, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Last question is Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in the interest of full disclosure, I've managed to get elected under STV and first past the post, 2 successful elections to DHBs across most of Auckland. So I'm not doing this out of self-interest. I know there's been accusations of us, you know, worried about change in case we don't get re-elected. So just putting that out there. Can I just ask if there's any opportunity? I'm going to be supporting the recommendations. I don't think we're right for change. But is there an opportunity in the future for us to link a possible change in the voting system to perhaps advocating for the government to see some sense in compulsory voting? Because I think the two need to kind of be linked. I'm sorry if that's kind of been covered already, but I just think we need to be a bit clearer.
Yes, that's not a subject that is open for submission unless we want to speak to that in our submission to the Select Committee on the inquiry into the 2016 elections. It has been raised, discussed by that committee in the past, but they've left it.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Mayor, the issue is, you know, we're desperate to get as many people voting. Whoever they vote for, we want people to participate, and I think anything that acts as a barrier to participation is a bad idea. I also think there's a slightly sort of golden glow over STV as a way of delivering up more diversity. I look at the DHBs, it delivers up the, you know, the same bunch of middle-aged white people like me. So I think we need to, STV is not the answer to diversity. I think different ways of dealing with our election and getting as many people voting as possible is actually the answer.
I think the question of a compulsory vote is an interesting one and is worthy debating, but we probably shouldn't do it within the context of this paper because it's not part of the consideration. But I used to be totally against it. I'm now probably leaning in favour of it. But it would be a wide-ranging debate that we needed, and we should have that one day.
Your Worship, perhaps just a comment
Sorry.
about the future scenario, and Marguerite's just reminded us that when we get to the point of having online voting, those sort of systems will prompt people on how to vote, and it will be much easier to vote correctly having a FPP and STV.
That's a good point. Thank you, and thank you, Marguerite. Right, we now come for discussion. So we've had the questions. Which councillors would... Councillor Newman would like to lead that off.
Your Worship, I don't think that the reference to the application of single transferable vote in Australia is a strictly accurate one, because if you... I mean, the ballot paper for an STV voting in Australia includes two options: you above the line or below the line. Above the line is what most Australians do, and that's when they give the rank. No, they don't tick, they rank the party that they want, and that means that all the candidates on the party's list in rank order of preference, that is how the distribution of the quota applies. And that is a very simple way for the Australian electors to exercise their choice using single transferable vote in Australia. That is not an option, as I understand, that's available here. What is available here would be the below-the-line option, which they also have in Australia, but which very few Australian electors use, where you have to go and literally rank every single one of them. The other thing is that, of course, if you go to an Australian polling station, you've got all these people that are lined up outside offering you the how to vote cards, where you can just receive one and literally do what your preferred party wants you to do. So I think it's a very different argument to what is being proposed here. So I support first past the post, and I would counsel against any reliance on the Australian option of STV, because that's not available for our system of voting, Your Worship.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor. I've got no other calls, so I think, I have now. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry for being a little bit late there. Look, I just can't help but think that the first motion is a bit irrelevant. It's not usual for us to highlight an emotion. There's not really a decision being made there. We don't have note decisions, but I'll let it lie. I have to say that I am disappointed that local boards are not contributing through formal resolutions to this. This is a really important matter. This is about democracy, and I think that is a gap. And I have brought up this matter that we needed to make this decision soon after the elections, and I just would have assumed that our management would have made sure that formal reports went to boards to garner their feedback to contribute to our decision making. This is an important matter. This is not a tick box exercise. This is at the heart of democracy, or it's part of that important process. So I stress that again. We cannot do anything about that at the moment because we've got to lodge this by 12 September. STV is not the voting method that got all of us here, or local board members, and it's you'll likely be sitting around here thinking, well, what is this STV? I'm not conversant with it. I'm safely and comfortably around this table without it, thanks very much. I note the reference to perceived complexity. I guess there's a perception of conflict on this. If it's not actual or perceived, it's certainly probably an internal conflict for many, because we're here not because of STV. We're here through what I would term a pretty archaic method that has done the nation and local authorities reasonably well, but we have been seeing significant decline in participation. And I'll come to that shortly. So I think the makeup of this council and local boards would likely look very different if it was an STV system that we used to elect members. Without doubt, I think it would be different. And it may mean that I'm not here, but I want the best possible and the most precise system to reflect this city's, the need for broad representation and to reflect the increasing diversity of this city region of ours, Auckland. The STV system, all the evidence from those countries, if you go to Scotland, I know Australia's been referenced, but maybe if you go to Scotland, you will see high levels of participation. And there are a number of other countries as well, but it's not that evidence of another nation that I want to bring here. If you look at just the analysis of STV in this report and other commentaries, there's some common threads that come through. And one is it delivers a more precise representation. All votes have weight. Every vote has weight. Not a single vote is wasted unless you destroy your vote or you abstain. And as I said earlier, it better reflects the increasing diversity of Auckland. When you come to the vote turnout of Auckland at the last election, we had a turnout of just 38.5%. Compared with those that have now gone to STV, I think the closest to that would be Palmerston North at 39%, Dunedin 45%, Greater Wellington, I think it's sort of 44%, Wellington 45.6%, Marlborough 53.7%. They're all well above the comparators that are using first past the post. Matamata was referred to before. Matamata went backwards at the last election at an alarming rate. It went back 24%. There's no evidence that Matamata is getting it right. In fact, it had a miserable turnout at the ballot box, and I'm sure Dale would attest to that, and we'll be looking at it. So members, I actually think we do need to look at this a lot more seriously. We don't have the time now. We have to make a decision here today. All the evidence that I see, and it's not the advantages and disadvantages on both sides, I see the advantages with STV, hands down. I'm not swayed by the perception of complexity. It's not showing up as being overly complex for the cities I've outlined. I think we should shift towards STV.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clow.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of have a question, if that's okay. I want to make sure that B is taken separately and by division. But I don't think B's, I think B's going to go through, it would appear, but where does that leave us with randomisation of the names instead of alphabetical?
Yeah, that's still an option that's debated next year. Yep.
Next year, okay.
Okay, I have no other, oh yes I do, sorry, Councillor Mike Lee.
I'll be very brief, Mr Mayor. I agree that A doesn't add much, you know, doesn't everything and everyone have advantages and disadvantages. I don't think we need to vote on that. But in regard to Councillor Darby's comments about voter participation and the mode of voting, I think he's not necessarily correct on this when I look at the voter turnout for small communities like Great Barrier Island, which is well over 60%, and Waiheke Island, which is close to 60%, and even the central city, which is over 50%. It's not necessarily the mode of voting, I believe, which is critical to this. Other factors are in play. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Reluctantly, as a member back in the day, in the 90s, of the Electoral Reform Coalition that actually saw the introduction of MMP, which we would all have to agree has introduced the diversity to Parliament that was missing, although that in itself has its ongoing shortcomings. I just feel that what is being proposed today here and by some, in terms of the adoption of STV at this point, is not going to be as workable as I'd like. I again come back to the role that Parliament has to play in actually setting the right framework for us across New Zealand in coming up with the right electoral tools to encourage that absolute expression of faith in our democracy that everybody's going to get out there. And I'd just like to see us, before we give consideration to any change, have dealt with this comprehensively, and I don't feel enough work has been undertaken to date. So reluctantly, I'm not really wanting to support change just at this moment. I think we need to put a lot more time into it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Finally, Your Worship, I think that we should keep it simple, simpler the better, and help people, encourage people to vote. So I'm going to stick with the recommendations. I think they're great. Thank you. First
Thank
past the
you.
post.
Last two comments, short and sweet. Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you. I was a bit torn on this. I fought hard during the referendum on when we had the MMP referendum to keep MMP because it was so important. I was worried that the first past the post was going to come back because I found, obviously in a central government sense, MMP did change the makeup of Parliament for the better in a lot of ways. My concern, and I probably would be sold more on STV if there was good examples of voter turnout on the STV areas, but actually the councils that did do STV were below or the same as us, apart from Wellington, which was 45%, but that increased, I'd say, largely because they had a really exciting mayoral contest. They had a lot of competition. And I didn't mean it like that.
I'd like you to qualify that comment, Councillor.
You want to start again?
You're on film, mate. You're on film.
Sorry, I'll just take the foot out of my mouth. I sort of meant because there was
They were more closely contested, I think, was what you were saying,
a large
Councillor.
number of candidates that were well known. Sorry.
Stop.
That's it, Richard.
I think
Do you want to quit while you're ahead, Richard?
Anyway, I probably shouldn't make non-evidential statements. Time for an Easter egg. But yeah, so I don't see that STV has changed the voter turnout in those areas that did have STV. I'm concerned that we do confuse people even more, and that is often the way people say they don't understand it. I mean, for God's sakes, we've had MMP for 20 years in New Zealand and people still don't understand it and are still asking questions and still don't exactly know. And even people who are closely interested in politics don't often understand MMP. So it's, I worry that changing it, we look at it, even things like electronic voting, I don't think will change the turnout. What changes turnout is exciting things. It's about engaging differently with people. It's making sure we include as many people as possible in everything we do and stopped being negative in the media and all sorts of different things. I think this one sort of panacea, we'll change the voting system and hope that it changes everything. I don't think a whole lot of young people I know are running out and going, man, I'd vote if we had STV, but I'm not going to vote now. You know, it's a bit difficult. So, yeah, I don't see a lot of evidence that's a clamour for change. So I will be voting for the to keeping first past the post. But in the back of my head, I also feel that's a shame because it is such a sort of, I don't know, I do worry about FPP as a sort of old system that's past its use by date. But I also know that the examples of Australia, they do have compulsory voting. So of course they're always going to have good turnout. But they also get Pauline Hanson, so that's a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you. I just point out that when Councillor Hills was talking about his views on when we changed from first past the post to MMP, he was age 6 at the time. It's a really worrying tendency, Councillor. Right. What I'm proposing is that we take A and C as noting together because it's simply noting, and then we take B separately and by division. So if councillors are happy with that, A and C are moved. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. And we'll now take the substantive recommendation B by division and ask officers to conduct the vote.
Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes.
Councillor Clow.
No.
Councillor Collins.
4.
Councillor Cooper.
Or
And see if I could beat these.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
yes.
Councillor Hills.
Yes.
Councillor Hulse.
Aye.
Councillor Denise Lee.
4.
Councillor Mike Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Newman.
4.
Councillor Quacks.
4.
Councillor Sayers.
4.
Councillor Simpson.
4.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Sir John Walker.
4.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
That's closer than Daresby's.
Okay, so the motion is
She's a
carried
brave,
by
singular
19 to 2. But
Didn't need anybody to stand with her. to be brave
thank you very
on her
much
own.
for that, councillors. We now
Another
move
bloke.
to item number 12. Councillor Filipaina, I think you want to move that. I'll second that, and if I can invite to the table Dominic Wilson, Head of Co-Governance. Dominic, if you'd like to speak briefly to that, and then we'll put it to questions.
Kia ora tātou. Yes, the paper, Your Worship, is about the non-voting Crown representative on the Tupuna Maunga Authority. The position lasts for the first 3 years of the existence of the authority, and after that point it lapses. And so the core of this paper is the question of whether the position should continue and for the period of its continuance. The Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage is proposing to appoint a non-voting representative for a period of 3 years with a further ability to appoint for another 3 years. And the reason why is because the Minister considers that this position will assist with furthering an application for World Heritage status for the Tupuna Maunga. Your Worship, I'd just like to highlight too that, and it's of course important to the Council that in this case the costs associated with this position are covered by the Crown, so there's no issue to the bottom line of the Council that I'm aware of. And the second matter, Sir, is that the appointment process, if it's agreed that a position should exist, is then handled by the Ministry, and the Council only has this question of whether the position should exist before it, sir.
Thank you very much. If I could just start off with a question. I understand the argument that having a Crown representative may actually help us in terms of our application for a World Heritage status, and that will probably sway many of us to support it. But are there any other reasons why we would have a Crown representative on this authority?
Sir, I'm aware that the treaty settlement process between the Crown, of course, and the Tāmaki Collective, that produced the concept that there would be a Crown representative that would keep an eye on the process for the first 3 years. And so the way that the legislation is set up, it's only for that first period. However, sir, I think there has been, I understand from the members of the authority, there has been benefit of having a Crown representative. And the last 3 years it's been a person from the Department of Conservation. But sir, in this particular position, the benefit really is largely focused on the potential for World Heritage status as a key plank of the aims of the Tupuna Maunga Authority.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Casey.
Yeah, I don't quite understand. What role, how does that improve our application? How does a voting member of the Maunga Authority?
Through the
Does
chair, So this is a non-voting member, but the person that's proposed is the senior manager, Tier 2 manager within the Ministry for Arts, Culture and Heritage, and it's the person who would actually lead the production of the bid within the ministry.
I still don't understand.
Further question?
I don't understand though, because that person will then be on the Hmong Authority making, decision making.
No, non-voting.
Non-voting.
No voting.
Yes, it's a non-voting position.
So
and
all we're doing is rolling over the current non-voting member.
Yes.
that's correct.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Oh, sorry, I missed that completely.
That's fine. Any other questions? If not, is there any discussion on this? I think it's pretty straightforward, but happy to entertain any comments. If not, I'll simply move to...
I'll second.
Sorry, Chris. Councillor Fletcher.
During the last term of council, I had the privilege of being the deputy chair on for the set-up phase of the Hmong Authority, and it was a great privilege to be there. It's been, I think, an outstanding success, but I repeatedly drew attention to the fact that the creation of these co-governance arrangements is at the discretion of the New Zealand Parliament in the case of the Te Puna Mangara Authority, but it was done without actually understanding the real costs that would be imposed on Auckland. And that remains unresolved, and I just really want to have the satisfaction that the continued representation from central government in some form on the Mangara Authority will actually result in some understanding of, we've got $80 million in our LTP for the Mangara Authority, and we know the long overdue maintenance on many of the manga. We understand that there are going to be increasing costs associated with applying for World Heritage status. There will be opportunities with it as well, but I'm just not completely convinced, given the level of representation I saw in that last 3 years, that it's actually going to translate to dollars. And at the end of the day, it's just dollars I want to see there. So I wonder whether a very able officer here would like to just give me that comfort.
Dominic.
Sir, as best I can, I am aware that Local Government New Zealand is working on research on the costs of co-governance with a case study on the Te Puna Mangara Authority in the future. So there may be some very concrete data to come out of that, sir, which may assist the member there. But, sir, perhaps also it can be something that perhaps the members highlighted a further point of interest of why there may be value in having the non-voting Crown representative, is that maybe it's an opportunity for the council to continue that dialogue into the future. That's perhaps all I can say, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to put our officer in a difficult situation, but my difficulty with a member of the Department of Conservation being there is DOC is underfunded already. It's an advocate that we need that actually has links to Treasury that is required. So I wonder whether there is a way, if we are to agree to this appointment, that we could influence who that person might be. It's probably something we take offline, but
I think you'd need to take that offline. The legislation, I presume, requires that the appointment be by the Minister of Arts, Culture and Heritage. So he or she, whoever it is at the time, could actually appoint. Is there any limitation on who the Minister might appoint? If there is no limitation, then representations could be made to the Minister, but I think they would still probably want to appoint the person that they thought was appropriate rather than us, but there would be no harm in trying. But is there any limitation on who the Minister appoints? Does it have to be a member of Conservation?
Sir, yes, the Act is clear that the appointments made by the Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage, I understand that it does go through Cabinet.
but it doesn't have to be a conservation person. So they have the minister has the flexibility. I think if there was a strong feeling about it, councillor, it would be a case of taking it up with the minister. But probably in the circumstances of the moment about the application for heritage status, conservation is probably the right department.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder whether we could then give consideration to a C to highlight the costs that are going to be associated with applying for World Heritage status and the importance of partnership with the government in being able to fulfil those aspirations. You know, we remain silent on this at our peril. We're going to go into this LTP process and we're going to look at every single dollar line that we've got, and I understand that this is going to be to bring Aomanga up to the standard that would be required for World Heritage status. It is going to be very costly, and we need to use every opportunity we can to highlight to central government the perhaps failure to actually understand at the time of establishment what long deferred maintenance and so forth existed, and why we need to work with them more closely on the funding of achieving the wider aspirations.
I think an amendment of that nature is probably outside the scope of this paper, but I'll ask Phil Wilson to comment on that.
My advice, Your Worship, would be not to conflate too much here. I think we make a discrete decision about the appointment, which has been run through the government's traps. Their recommendation is the one before you at the moment. I think a separate piece of dialogue, a separate piece of advocacy to ministers around funding for the World Heritage is entirely in order, but we can pursue that in conjunction with the Maunga Authority itself, because there's the iwi interest to take into account here also.
I think that's probably the right advice in the circumstances.
Well, thank you for that. But my point, I hope that I've made quite clear, is that I am hopeful that a senior person representing the Crown will be put at this. This is not a position that we want to see somebody just being sent along for the ride. We want to see this being taken seriously by the government and a senior representative made available because of the importance of this going forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Casey. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak, but I was just going to, well, I am now, obviously. I wasn't going to agree with C because they are two separate issues, and I know as the current Deputy Chair of the Tupuna Maunga Authority, there have been discussions amongst the committee around the issues that Councillor Fletcher has raised. So speaking to the recommendation, Your Worship, I note in 9 that the Tupuna Taonga or Tamaki Makaurau Trust have also supported the appointment, as in the ability for the Crown person to be there, and also fully support the proposed 3-year term and the ability for another 3. And that basically, as pointed out in 8, ensures consistency of the Crown representation engagement. So, Your Worship, speaking to the recommendation, fully endorse it. And I know that iwi plus Tupuna Maunga Authority Committee also endorse the recommendations. So, and ngā mihi ki a koe e matua in regards to the report. Kia ora nā.
Thank you, Alf. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. And carried. And thank you very much, Dominic, for your participation here. We move to item 13 on the agenda, contributions policy and variation to that. And if I could ask, please, Andrew Duncan to come to the table and Matthew Walker. Oh, so Sean, sorry, I thought this was Andrew's paper. I'll formally move the motion. Have I got a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Cashmore and Matthew or Sean, who would like to lead off on that? Matthew.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. So I'll just give a little bit of background. Sean Thompson has been part of the team with Auckland Transport and ourselves negotiating the agreement with the developer, and I'll just make a couple of comments and then ask Sean just to round out the picture for you so you get a sense of the agreement in place with Drury South Limited. Look, this is a fairly administrative item. Effectively what you would be approving is an amendment to our development contribution policy that lets us charge a different price in Drury South, reflecting the works that we're now getting ready to undertake to unlock housing in the SHA in Drury South. I do want to just give a little bit of background, touch on the mechanics, and then pass on to Sean. So a couple of points around the background. In a budgetary sense, we had actually provided for around 65 million in the 15-25 LTP. So there's no surprises here around the intention that we would make some commitments for infrastructure provision in the area. So in a budget sense, this is all fairly straightforward. The other important piece of context that I'm sure you'll probably remember, our HIF bid to central government that you authorised in March, I think, had a bigger area in the south, which enveloped the Drury South area, and the spend in an infrastructure sense there is about 390 million, focused on enabling around just shy of 18,000 houses in the south. So a significant move in terms of greenfield development in the south, and this is a piece of that jigsaw. Now, this is where we kind of just get into the practical realities of where we are today and how we move forward. You'll all be aware, post the announcement from Minister of Finance, Prime Minister, 2 or 3 weekends ago in terms of the refashioning of Crown Fibre, giving it a bigger infrastructure mandate. So we sit here today with quite a valid expectation that indeed Crown Infrastructure Partnerships will start to pick up the work of, rounding up interested parties in the south in terms, in alignment with our HIF bid and becoming effectively the financier and arranger to keep this program moving. So I'm saying all of this so you get the context of today's decision. This is all just about being able to keep the ball rolling. In fact, it is about hitting earthworks season this summer, I believe, or spring. And so we've been able to, through that initial budget provision that we made in the current LTP, identify the capital source, and what we've also put in place via the appropriate means. So we've held consultation with the single affected party, which is Drury South Limited, around an arrangement which would see that cost fully recovered through development contribution charges. So if you did look through 1 or 2 of the attachments, you'll see a pretty healthy increase in the development contribution charge that would apply in this area. It goes up by about $25,000 per house. They would be paying $41,000 per lot, and we've worked that through with them, and they accept that, understand that, and they're comfortable moving forward. So look, if I could just ask Sean perhaps to just make a couple of comments, perhaps Sean, just things around the precinct generally, so people get a sense of the wider initiative that Drury South Limited have, and also I think there's an important clause that we've negotiated in the agreement which kind of honours the intent of keeping the ball rolling.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, just within the Drury South precinct, in particular the SHA area, it's made up of roughly 45 hectares and is currently zoned residential precinct, terraced housing, apartment building zone, mixed housing urban zone and mixed housing suburban zone, with the balance of the precinct being light industrial commercial. So that's the current overall zoning for the Drury South precinct. In relation to the development agreement, the purpose of the development agreement, as Matthew's pointed on, is enables the developer to start earthworks to construct the bulk earthworks to construct the spine road in October. What the spine road does, the first section of the spine road, enables the SHA area to be opened up and further developed over the over a period of time. Yep.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Can I just start off the questions? The first question is, by making this change to the contributions policy, we effectively bring this development forward potentially by, what, 6 or 7 months? Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I would just say a full season, really. So
A whole year?
Yeah,
12
actually,
months.
yeah.
Yeah.
12 months, that's good. That's a good reason for doing it. The second thing is, you said that normally the development contribution would be about 25,000, was it, or 20,000 per house, and this policy will increase the development contribution to 45,000. Did I get those figures right, first of all?
Not quite right on the numbers. So the charge would be about 41,000 per lot in the area, and that's about a 25,000 per lot increase in the prior charge. You'll often hear us talk about averages at just over the 20,000 mark. Those are averages, so we differentially price stormwater and the various services according to cost in different areas.
And the reason, I mean, that's a doubling of the development contribution per lot. The reason for that, is that towards the financing of the SPV, or is it for other reasons?
So we've talked about this a lot, and the first thing is it's just simply the reality of the costs. So we've talked about the next greenfield areas in the south, in the north, in the northwest. You are going to see exactly this kind of pattern, whereby the overall DC charge moves reasonably significantly, but as we progress and develop a model with Crown Infrastructure Partners, there will also be a discussion around diluting or adding to that mix targeted rates and other tools. But there's nothing, it simply reflects the as identified cost of providing infrastructure in those areas, both in the sense of here you've got an example of, a specific $18 million road. It's stage 1 of the spine road works, but you will have those developers, as does everyone else, still contributing to the likes of the CRL and major regional infrastructure that's catering for growth as well.
Okay, just so I know I've got that right. So this is more a reflection of the costs of the development of the infrastructure than anything to do with the financing of the SPV?
Yes, although the two become, there's a marriage there. Yep.
Yep, I think. Right, any other questions? Councillor Casey and then Councillor Cashmore.
I'm looking at Schedule 4, Summary of Capital Expenditure of Growth and Community Infrastructure. Can you just tell me what we mean by, and I understand about community centres, halls, playgrounds and public toilets, but the phrase also used to fund projects subject to transition rules, Clause 8, Schedule 1AA. What is that?
Wow, yeah. I will do my best. That won't be that good, and I probably should have had one of Andrew's team members, Bobby Parkinson, here, who is right on this stuff. But I do recall Bobby stepping you and others through this. I think what that's referring to is at the time that the government changed the rules to make it harder for certain types of community infrastructure to be in the development contribution net. It did, however, let us transition some projects which were already on the books through the process. So I think that's all that's referring to, Councillor.
Okay, do we know how much of that fund is in the transition section and how much is in the new and expanded?
No, but I would be happy to have Bobby come back to you offline on that.
It would be good if no, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks. Matthew, as far as we understand the residential side of this with the 15,000 houses as part of the whole scope of that massive build that's happening in the Drury area, what about the commercial land? There's a big commercial development there going to employ between 5,000 and 6,000 people over time. Is they going to be contributing as well in this sort of method for this SPV type program going forward?
So, yeah, so that's absolutely the intention. I think when we talked a little bit last week, I think it was, about Crown Fibre Holdings, which is rebranding itself as Crown Infrastructure Partnerships. In fact, I'm quite keen to bring one of their executive along when we have a workshop around this sort of issue in early September. But the absolute intention is that wider south development, including commercial and all of the employment opportunities that come with the commercial development, will be a part of the program that they pick up the financing responsibility for, and that would include the wider Drury precinct.
So this, with your indulgence, Mr Mayor, is just bringing the process forward for this season?
Yeah, it's been an interesting process. Things with government take a while. We gave them the opportunity to move real quick. Feels like we're moving quick-ish, but not as quick as real quick. But if we didn't do this arrangement, quick would have become slow. So we're just putting a little piece in there, making a contribution in that sense. We take a degree of risk with the development contribution financing arrangement, but we're up for that. We'd indicated that. And it just enables Crown Infrastructure a few more months to refine their model, make the connections and come in and hopefully do the bigger transaction.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Any wider comments on it? I think most of us will see this as positive, bringing forward by 12 months the start of construction of 700 houses. That's we need those houses, and we need them quicker, not slower. There's no comment. I'll put the resolution. It's on your screens in front of you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. So, thank you very much, gentlemen, for that work. Item number 14, appointment to Living Cells Technology Limited, the Animal Ethics Committee. Warwick, can we have you back at the table?
I move, Mr Chairman.
I'll second.
Neil's been a good representative.
Been moved and seconded before I even got to it. That's fine.
We've done this a few times before, Mr Chairman.
Yeah, I gather.
This one.
Moved Councillor Cooper, seconded Councillor Casey, I think. Probably doesn't require any questions, but are there any questions? Probably doesn't require any comment, but is there any comment? I'll therefore put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Right, we're making good progress. Must be nearly lunchtime. Councillor Richard Hills, item number 15, your recent trip not to Taipei, but to Taipei, Taiwan.
Taipei.
Was it spelt wrong?
It was originally, but I think it's been corrected. It's right on the screen.
Cool, so I just wanted to give you a quick update on the trip. Hang on, I need to turn this on. Never used it.
I swear that...
We get pictures.
Yes. So this was a Taiwan Future Leaders study camp. It was not funded by the ratepayer. The only cost to the ratepayer was the ratepayers union asking for it to be investigated. And I assume there was cost because they asked for it to be investigated, and it was $0.
Are you the only non-statue in that picture?
Yes. There was a park full of statues of the Chiang Kai-shek, the founder of Taiwan, and then when the parliament changed, they took all the statues out of the schools and put them in one park. Right. Cool. So basically, Taipei is quite a small area. The population is almost double ours, and it's very warm. The trip was fascinating to be with a whole lot of people from the Asia Pacific. There were attendees from all parts of politics, state governments, councils. It was really good to understand, what's been happening in their cities. So that was handy. Once again, so the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Taiwan paid for the trip, and I paid for my own accommodation. This is everyone on the trip, and that's in Liberty Square. And here is at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where I met Moira Turley, who's the Director of the New Zealand Commerce and Industry Office in Taipei. And we met separately with the government officials and the opposition and discussed a myriad of things, especially around climate change and energy. We visited all the religious and cultural temples. Every day was sort of seminars and conference, and then they took us to various parts around Taipei. So it was seminars on climate change, energy, regional policies, economic policies, and then we went to a tea factory and a knife factory. They actually made, there's a knife factory where they make knives out of the ammunition shells that were bombed on them, so they're recycling, which is good. The questions that we were often asked, it was around energy, so they are pretty jealous. Many of the officials are pretty jealous of how we are 80% renewable when Taiwan is primarily coal and nuclear, but they're really wanting to move away from that and towards more renewable energy. Some of the issues they're having, though, because solar's the easiest way, is there's a lot of illegal building on top of all their buildings. So you'll have an apartment block and then someone sort of squats and builds their own floor on top of that apartment block with sheds and iron and different things. So it's quite difficult to then get solar happening across. Their infrastructure is pretty amazing. There's a really good mix of historical stuff and the new mixed well together, and they're moving to more green buildings as well. I met with a councillor, a recently elected councillor, and she was really interested in what we're doing in public transport and cycling, and she sort of kept saying, you know, don't get disheartened, we didn't have much 20 years ago, and now their facilities are amazing. She campaigned quite heavily on same-sex marriage, which is interesting as a councillor. I don't know how much that they'd be involved with that, but obviously had done some research on me, so she wanted to ask a lot of questions. So she gave me a rainbow hop card, which is a limited edition little hop card, which is quite nice. Their voter turnout of youth is pretty low, and so we discussed different ways on how we can improve that in our cities. But it's quite funny, they have 63, and you'll like this, Desley, they have 63 elected councillors, and they each have their own team of staff, so six staff each, and they can run their own campaigns, and
Don't get any ideas.
do a whole lot of stuff. But
a recommendation?
it was quite interesting to see that they were willing to do all these different campaigns, and also because there's 63 of them, they elect a chair for like a Speaker of the House almost, and they have to fight for positions, so they have props. She has a big nuclear warhead she holds up, and there was a whole lot of other random things, so to get a say, it's quite different to the orderly process we have here. Most of the time. So they were quite interested in our anti-nuclear stance, and they were amazed that we could get that through. On social housing, in the issues I was talking about last week, they said if you have public land, use it now, because they are at crisis point. They have a lot of homeless people and people that can't afford housing, and there is no land. There's not a postage stamp of public land that can be used easily for housing. So they were sort of saying, use this as an opportunity now to plan ahead for that. Here's their U-bike system, which I thought was really, really interesting. These stations were everywhere, and they're really, really easy to use. They're about the last mile, first mile sort of thing at all the transport hubs around everywhere. They basically the trial failed, so they did a trial 7 years ago. So if you think of 7 years ago, that was only when we started the Super City, so it's not actually that long ago. They had 500 bikes. It failed, basically. There wasn't enough people using it. But their advice to me or to us was increase the coverage. So the trial failed because there was limited coverage. There was only 11 sites. It was hard to register. It was too expensive, and there was too small. So then they ramped it up they went from 11 stations to 300 stations. They went from 500 bikes to 10,700 bikes. They went from 5,000 trips a month on these bikes to 50,000 trips a day. And that's only in 7 years. But that has completely changed the nature of the inner city. They barely have any on-street car parking at all now, and it's actually reduced the amount of space taken up from bike parking as well, because people just jump off the train and use these bikes as opposed to bringing their own into the city. And there's lots of scooters, I must say, but largely they've completely lost the need for on-street parking because it's so easy to jump off transport and jump on one of these bikes. It's about 40 cents per half an hour, so really, really cheap. And because everyone knows within about 5 minutes walk or 5 minutes ride there's another station to drop it, it's very easy, and you don't have to go, what am I going to do with my bike? They're everywhere. It's run by the Department of Transportation, but they use a lot of commercial enterprise to help fund it. So they have a space on the back of the tyre, which they use for advertising. Some of the stations have lots of advertising on them, and other companies are keen to, advertise their things and get involved. I bumped into the mayor doing a big presentation on bikes, and he had a whole lot of people with bikes standing out in the street, and it was just hundreds of people cheering over bikes, so it was pretty interesting. It's obviously reduced emissions, and there's other things. Oh, and 95% now customer satisfaction, and they only have about a 1% theft rate because it's GPS. So, yeah, I guess our thing is when we do this, which inevitably we will, we have to make sure that it's sort of go big or go home, because if we make it too small, it's not gonna fly. That's just some other thing. Oh, the other thing is to build cycleways. So 4 years ago they had just under 50 kilometres of cycleways. So that's mostly separated cycleways. Now they've got 190 kilometres at the same time. So if you want to do a good bike share scheme, you've got to make it safe and easy for all ages, and then people will come. I went to the metro as well. It started, so they kicked it off 20 years ago. 1999, they had 35,000 passengers a day. Now they have 2 million passengers a day. So if you think of that they have 2.7 million population, and you could say most people are taking 2 trips a day, it's sort of almost half the population are using public transport on the metro every day. And they're aiming for 60% of all trips in the metropolitan area to be on public transport. The stations shut down, I think it's between 1 and 4, and everything is clean. So the tracks are clean, the stations are cleaned, the trains are clean inside and out. You're not allowed to take food or drink or gum. They're very strict, the security around that, but it is so clean and so well used, and that also increases people wanting to use it because it feels safe and it feels like a good place to be on. Some of their busiest platforms have 1 train every 80 seconds, and every train opens the doors and shuts them within 40 seconds, so you're either on or you're not, but it's okay because there's another one in about 1 or 2 minutes time. So it's pretty phenomenal stuff. There's the usage over the last 20 years. It's a phenomenal change if you invest. And I got to visit the mainframe or whatever. It looked like a NASA kind of headquarters. It was pretty amazing. They had everything going on, watching for earthquakes, storms. They could tell if there was a fault, and they would send people, an army of people to the fault straight away, which was really good. They've used lots of public artwork and made all the places, the stations, which I think we need to do with the City Rail Link and light rail stations and other things. We need to make them usable and exciting places to be. And much of it was funded through value uplift, much like we're trying to do with the City Rail Link. This is because, once again, their issue was they didn't have any land. So they would work with businesses, hotels, apartments to get all the stations underneath those buildings, and often funded commercially because people wanted people pouring into their businesses from underneath. They kept telling us it's never too late. This did take them 20 years, but we're starting now effectively in the last couple of years to really ramp up public transport. So, I think things can obviously change pretty fast. That is all. And if any questions? Yep.
Right. Question. Well, first of all, I think Councillor Collins, you want to move that we receive the presentation. Councillor Filipaina, you want to second that?
Aye.
And we have a question from
How
Councillor
many of
Casey.
the 63 councillors were women?
Oh, I actually can't remember, but it was a good number, and the Parliament too. I can't remember, but I will get you those figures. They did. I've got the booklet which has all that in there, but it's definitely an aim. They also have Indigenous seats as well, so that was quite interesting. Yeah.
Councillor Clode. Got a question? No? Councillor Cashmore.
So good report, Richard. What is the topography of Taipei like? I've never been there. And what is the density of the population living?
Yeah, so it's pretty dense. I don't have the exact figures, I don't think, but I can get you those. But basically, the area of the city is, if you think of Auckland, the urban area of Auckland's 1,000 kilometres squared, where Taipei's 271, and they have 2.7 million sitting there. So obviously more people means more investment is easier to happen. But it is mostly tall buildings, but they have a lot of parkland. It's really green, there's lots of trees, and they've left, similar to the heritage areas over time. Here, they've left a lot of spaces that are the old streets and everything as they are. But you don't feel overcrowded at all because people, I guess there's not many cars. So you kind of more people-friendly spaces. You don't feel like it's overcrowded or anything like that. But,
Hilly or flat?
in the central city, it's pretty flat, but then there's, it gets hillier as you further you go out.
It's obviously changed a lot. When I first went there, you'd cross a road and there'd be 1,000 belching motorbikes bearing down on you, making a hell of a racket. So they've moved a long way in the last 20 years. Councillor Simpson, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Worship. Richard, if you had to say the top two things that potentially Auckland could benefit from if it adopted as a result of your visit, what would they be? What are the two main things you think that maybe Auckland should take up as a result of visiting Taipei?
Definitely the U-bike scheme. Potentially because of our topography, we may need to invest more in the electric bikes, but it was phenomenally easy, and it was just something that everyone was using, and you really noticed there was just no cars in the central city, and you've got tens of thousands of people everywhere. But because they've made the places you can cycle safe and easy to pick up, it's just simple, and it didn't use that much. The stations didn't use that much land, so that's one. And probably just making the public transport pleasant spaces and safe places to be. So there was always security. It was always really clean, like meticulously clean, and there was exciting stuff happening on. So I think if we turn everything we're doing from not just a infrastructure and moving people perspective, but about how we use every piece of land where people are as exciting places to be, I think people then want to look after it and use it a lot more. So yeah, definitely those two kinds.
Did the cyclists wear helmets?
No, that's the other issue that I think I might have mentioned it in here. Yeah. That is an issue for us. Over there, there's no laws for helmets. So I guess for me, I don't know if the government would ever change the law to stop helmets, but if there's a way, if we get some good separated cycle routes, is it a time where we say maybe on the separations or within the central city that maybe helmets aren't allowed? I think it's only us in Australia who force the helmet law. So that was something that was just so simple. It was you get off the train and you're literally riding maybe 500 metres or so to work, and the helmets are an issue. Whether people are comfortable reusing someone else's helmet or carry their own helmet with them, I don't know. That would be a challenge. So.
Okay, Councillor Filippini, you've got a question?
It's not a question. I just want to acknowledge Ned from the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Office, who's here representing the Director General. So I just want to acknowledge him.
Sorry, I didn't see Leo there, and I must say that the information and being picked up at the airport and being taken. So I was prepared to taxi around on the day when I was visiting all the different transport hubs, and they took me around in a car and had translators for me and had. Leo was checking in all the time if the trip was going all right and I was safe and happy, and it was the people and the hospitality was seriously amazing. It was nothing I'd experienced before, so it was pretty cool. And I was over there on my birthday, and the council sung me happy birthday and brought me a cake, and so it was quite cool.
Just don't expect that sort of treatment back here,
Yeah,
Councillor.
no.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Thank you. It's a very, very good report, and it's of value to us, and it was when Deputy Mayor Cashmore came back with his report. Those trips can be really valuable in getting insights and parallels on issues that are important to us. So moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried.